Shmusicator, roughly an hour east of Prague, lies a place Shmusic, in a small town named Kutná Hora, where the walls are built from people. Music, not figuratively, not symbolically, not in the way poets speak of buildings made from sacrifice or suffering. Literally, the walls, the ceiling, the decorations, the chandeliers, the coat of arms above the entrance. Everything is constructed out of human bones. 40,000 skeletons taken apart, sorted, piled, wired together, and shaped into architectural and decorative forms, with a precision that points not to insanity, but to system, not to defilement, but to deliberate shaping, not to terror, but to intention. This is the Sedlec Ossuary. Every year, hundreds of thousands of visitors walk down a narrow staircase into a small chapel beneath the All Saints Cemetery Church, take photos, share them online, call it creepy or beautiful or both, and then leave. The guides give the usual explanation. The gift shop sells postcards. The whole experience is wrapped up, consumed, and forgotten by the time the bus is back in Prague. But the usual explanation never satisfied me. And the more I dug, the more I saw that it shouldn't satisfy anyone. Because the standard story has gaps you could drive a hearse through. Behind those gaps sits a question so disturbing that I understand why nobody lingers on it long enough to ask. Here's what you'll hear if you go. In 1278, an abbot from the Sedlec monastery traveled to the Holy Land and came back with a bit of soil from Golgotha, the hill where Christ was supposedly crucified. He sprinkled that holy soil over Sedlec Cemetery, and word spread. The graveyard became one of the most sought after burial spots in Central Europe. Everyone wanted a piece of that sacred ground. The cemetery expanded. Then came the Black Death in the mid-1300s. Then the Hussite Wars tore through Bohemia in the early 1400s. Tens of thousands of bodies were buried at Sedlec in a fairly short time. The cemetery grew too crowded. Bones had to be dug up to make space for new burials. Those exhumed bones were stored in the chapel's crypt. Then in 1870, a woodcarver named František Rint was hired by the Schwarzenberg family to arrange the bones into the displays we see today. That's the story. Holy soil, plague deaths, war casualties, overcrowded graves, practical exhumation, artistic arrangement, case closed, tour over, back on the bus. Except it's not closed. Not even close. Start with the number 40,000. That figure appears in every guidebook, every website, every documentary about Sedlec. 40,000 skeletons. But when I tried to track down the origin of that number, to find the study or the census or the archaeological count that produced it, I turned up nothing solid. It seems the number was guessed, repeated, and hardened into fact through sheer repetition. Some sources say 40,000, others say 70,000. Some claim the bones in the ossuary are only a portion of what was dug up from the cemetery, that the true number of remains processed through this site over the centuries was far larger. The uncertainty itself speaks volumes. We don't know with any accuracy how many people are in that room. We just know it's an enormous number, and we've stopped wondering how it got so enormous. This raises a simple but critical question. Even taking the plague and the wars into account, even accepting how desirable the cemetery was, does the math add up? The Black Death wiped out roughly 30 to 60% of Europe's population. The Hussite Wars devastated Bohemia, but Kutná Hora was a small town. Its surrounding area wasn't a major population hub. For 40,000 or more bodies to end up in one cemetery over about 2 centuries, you'd need either a far larger regional population than historical records suggest, or a far more systematic collection process than simple local burial. Where did all these people actually come from? The deeper I went, the more I realized Kutná Hora was no ordinary town. In the 13th and 14th centuries, it was among the wealthiest places in Europe. The reason silver. The Kutná Hora silver mines supplied a huge share of Europe's silver. The town's mint produced the Prague groschen, one of the most important currencies in medieval European trade. Wealth drew people. People drew conflict. Conflict produced bodies. This much fits the standard story. But here's what the standard story skims over. Mining towns don't just attract settlers. They attract laborers. Vast numbers of laborers. People pulled from across regions, across borders, from wherever desperation was strong enough to drive a human being underground into tunnels with poisoned air and collapsing ceilings, where life expectancy was measured in years, not decades. The silver mines of Kutná Hora needed a constant flow of human bodies because they consumed human bodies at a rate no local population could sustain. And those bodies, once the mines were done with them, had to go somewhere. The silence was striking when I searched for scholarship linking the Sedlec cemetery's unusual size to the labor demands of the silver mines. Because the link seems so obvious. A town whose main industry used up human lives on an industrial scale, right next to a cemetery that accumulated human remains on a scale that defies ordinary demographic logic. The holy soil story is charming. The plague and war explanation is convenient. But underneath both lies a simpler and darker possibility, that the Sedlec cemetery grew so vast not mainly because of sacred tourism or epidemic death, but because it served as the disposal site for a mining industry that treated human beings as a consumable resource. The bones in the ossuary aren't just bones. They might be the remains of an industrial workforce, the medieval equivalent of a company graveyard, and the elaborate artistic arrangement that tourists photograph today might be, whether intended or not, the decoration of a mass grave, as if someone were following instructions they didn't fully understand. Now, consider the arrangement itself, because this is where the official explanation becomes truly weak. František Rint, the woodcarver hired in 1870 to organize the bones. We're told the Schwarzenberg family, who owned the property, commissioned him to bring order to the accumulated remains. He spent years sorting bones by types, skulls with skulls, femurs with femurs, vertebrae with vertebrae, then arranging them into the displays we see today. The chandelier, said to contain at least one of every bone in the human body. The large bell, shaped piles in the four corners of the chapel. The garlands of skulls draped across the ceiling. The Schwarzenberg coat of arms made entirely from human remains, complete with a raven pecking at a skull's eye socket. A detail from the family's heraldic tradition. We're told Rint was an artist, that this was his creative vision, that he turned a storage problem into a work of art. And maybe that's true. But the deeper I looked at the arrangement, the more I noticed something the creative, genius story doesn't explain. The arrangements aren't random. They're not purely decorative. They follow geometric patterns. Specific mathematical rules govern where the bones go. The bell-shaped mounds in the corners show a structural precision that suggests engineering know how, not just artistic instinct. The bones interlock. They support one another. The structures hold together, not just because they've been glued or wired, though some wiring exists, but because they've been assembled using principles of load distribution and structural balance. A woodcarver in 1870 produced architectural structures from human bones that demonstrate engineering principles. Where did that knowledge come from? The official answer is Rint's craftsmanship, his intuitive grasp of materials, his skill with three-dimensional form. And maybe that's enough. But when I looked at other ossuaries across Europe, the same mathematical precision appears, the same structural principles, the same geometric arrangements, as if building with human bones wasn't invented by Rint in 1870, but was an existing tradition he was working within. The pattern repeats with unsettling consistency. Because Sedlec isn't alone. There are ossuaries across Europe that predate it, that share its structural logic, that arrange human remains according to the same principles. The Capuchin crypt in Rome, the Chapel of Bones in Evora, Portugal, the ossuary beneath San Bernardino al Osso in Milan, the catacombs of Paris, where the remains of 6 million people were moved from overcrowded cemeteries in the late 1700s and arranged in patterns that tourists now walk through by candlelight. Each has its own official explanation. Each explanation is local and specific: cemetery overcrowding, plague burials, monastic tradition, public health necessity. And each explanation, taken alone, is plausible. But taken together, across countries, across centuries, across cultures that supposedly arrived at the same practice independently, the pattern demands a different question. Not why each individual ossuary existed, but why does the practice of architecturally arranging human bones recur so consistently across European history? The official history treats each ossuary as an isolated phenomenon, a local answer to a local problem. But the deeper I looked, the more I found connections, monastic networks linking the institutions behind many of these ossuaries, architectural similarities suggesting shared knowledge rather than independent invention. A common symbolic vocabulary, specific skull arrangements, specific geometric patterns, specific relationships between bone types and decorative schemes that appears across sites separated by hundreds of miles and hundreds of years. And here's the question that haunts me. The question the tour guides ignore and the guidebooks never ask. What was the purpose? Not the practical purpose of storing exhumed remains, but the purpose of the arrangement. Because you don't need to build a chandelier out of human bones to solve a storage problem. You don't need geometric towers. You don't need a coat of arms made of femurs and skulls. The artistic arrangement serves no practical function. It turns a utilitarian space into something else entirely. Something ritual, something intentional, something that carries meaning. But what meaning? The standard religious answer is memento mori, remember you will die. The bones are a meditation on mortality, a reminder of life's transience, a spiritual lesson in humility, and that works on the surface. But memento mori doesn't require 40,000 skeletons arranged with mathematical precision. A single skull on a desk does the job. The scale of Sedlec, the scale of all the great ossuaries, suggests something beyond a simple death reminder. The deeper I dug into medieval and early modern religious practices, the more I found references to the belief that arranged bones served a specific spiritual function. Not just as reminders to the living, but as preparations for the dead. The arrangement was believed to matter for the resurrection. The bones had to be kept, ordered, maintained in specific relationships, because at the end of days, they would need to be reassembled. The ossuary wasn't a memorial. It was a waiting room, a holding pattern for the dead, kept with the precision required by the promised resurrection. But here's the troubling part. That theological explanation, if taken seriously, implies something extraordinary about the people who built these structures. It implies they truly believed that the physical arrangement of bones in the present would affect the spiritual fate of the dead in the future. That the geometry mattered. That the placement mattered. That getting it right wasn't decorative but essential. And if they believed that, then the mathematical precision of the arrangements isn't artistic. It's liturgical. It's functional. It's an engineering problem, in the most literal sense, an attempt to build something that would work, that would accomplish a specific metaphysical task, that would prepare the dead for whatever came next. We look at the bone chandeliers and see art, or horror, or curiosity. What if the people who built them saw something else entirely? What if they saw machinery, sacred machinery designed to a specification we no longer understand? Built according to principles we've dismissed as superstition, serving a function we've filed under medieval navity and stopped investigating. The silence was striking when I looked for serious academic work on this possibility, because the modern scholarly approach to ossuaries is almost entirely art, historical or anthropological. The arrangements are analyzed as cultural artifacts, as expressions of religious sentiment, as aesthetic objects. They are not analyzed as functional systems. The possibility that these structures were built to do something, not just to mean something, is treated as a question too embarrassing to ask in professional settings. And maybe that's right. Maybe the bone towers of Sedlec are exactly what the guidebooks say: a creative solution to a practical problem, a woodcarver's masterpiece, a tourist attraction with good lighting and a well-stocked gift shop. But I keep coming back to the 40,000, to the precision, to the geometry, to the fact that this same practice, this same mathematical logic, this same treatment of human remains appears across centuries and across borders with a consistency that coincidence can't comfortably explain. I keep coming back to who taught František Rint to build with bones, where that knowledge came from, what tradition he was working within, and why that tradition existed in the first place. I keep coming back to the fact that we've turned these spaces into tourist destinations and stopped asking what they were actually for. Handed an audio guide and told it was the whole story. What else have we been handed and never thought to question?